Hello everyone, welcome to another JavaScript tutorial video. This video is going to cover different ways to do the same thing, and I might do this as a series at some point, but for now, the different thing, or I should say the same thing that we're going to do in different ways, is going to be creating an array. The first way that we'll do that is by creating an array from a number, and then later on, we'll create arrays from another array. And within each of those, we'll look at different ways to accomplish that. So this is not a deep dive into any one of these methods to reach the same goal, but it is just designed to show that there are many different paths that you can take to reach the same end result. Okay, so with that said, let's get started. We start with an element count of 3, and then we have a blank array here, just this R here. So the first way to fill this, and our goal, by the way, is going to be to get this to fill up with the numbers 1, 2, and 3. The first way to do that is to start with a for loop, and we start with our I at 0. And then when I is less than our element count of 3, we will push into the array I plus 1. So instead of pushing in 0, we get 0 plus 1 for the first one, and then of course it increments by 1 and does it again. So if we run this, then you'll see that we end up with 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so that's one way to do it, to fill up our array with 1, 2, and 3. The other, or I should say another way, not the only other way, is while loops. So this is one of these while loops. I have two here, and we can say while the R length is less than our element count, we are going to push in that R length plus 1. So since the length is 0 at first, and we just add 1, and then since it has increased in length, the next time it goes through, it will be a length of 1 plus 1, so that'll be 2, and so on. So that's kind of a way to reach the same goal without something like an index variable there, that I. Another way is to actually use that index variable of I, and we just change it a little bit. We say while I is less than the element count, we push in I plus 1 and increment I by 1. So this one is more similar to our for loop here. So that's another way to do it. Let's comment that out. Okay, another way to do this is if we look at this array.from method, then you can see that we have, we're not actually using that original blank R. We're creating the array using array.from. And array.from lets you choose a length. So you write array.from, and then you do your parentheses, and then surrounding this, you have your length, and you set that to whatever you want the length to be. So in this case, we know that we want it to be 3 elements long, and then we put a comma in there and we put in our function of what we want to do to each of those elements. So in this case, we want to return I plus 1, just like we were doing before. So 0 plus 1 for the first one, and then when I increments by 1, it'll be 2 and 3 and so on. So that's just another quick way to throw together an array where you don't actually have another array to create it from, for example. So there's our, let's actually, this one. There we go. Okay, and finally, before we get into creating arrays from another array, I thought this one was interesting, although to be honest, for this example, it's probably not great, but I think it's still worth knowing, of course. If we just cut this away, you'll see that we have just the word array, right, in capital, and then we have a parenthesis, and then we have our element count. So this actually creates a blank array. It has 3 empty items. I guess I shouldn't say it's blank because there's still elements in here, but they're empty. So what you have to do is .fill, and you could fill it with something like this, but that would just be 333. So instead, we would want to do something like .fill.map, and then we would map exactly what we wanted over there. So that would work just fine. Oops, let's clear that and run this again. Oh, maybe it doesn't like this. There we go. Okay, so that is several different ways to fill an array just given a number, right? Given basically a length or a number that you want to fill it from. Now, another way to create arrays is if you are creating from another array, so something that's already existing, and you just want to base your new array off of that original array. And we're not going to actually go through any mutations here. We're going to still create new arrays here. So let's bring our, I guess we'll just bring our log down here. So like this. So the goal on this one is instead of 1, 2, 3, we're going to try adding 1 to each of these. So we'll start with the for loop, and this one is very similar to the first for loop, except for instead of an element count or that variable that we set at the very beginning, we are saying that when I is less than the length of this array, then go ahead and do this. And we are just pushing in, filled R at the index of this. So when I is 0, we're going to be looking at this one, and when I is 1, we're looking at this one, and we're just pushing that, whatever that ends up being, plus 1. And since it's 1, 2, 3, and we're adding 1 to each of these, we'll get 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now, a more elegant for loop is just this one here. So for every single element of that filled array, which again is this 1, 2, 3, we just push in that element, but we add 1 to it. So that one is, I think, just a bit nicer to read, and it's maybe a bit more modern. Okay, then of course we can do the same with a while loop. So we say that while the length of the array that we're pushing into is less than the length of our filled array, we are going to push in that filled array at the filled array length, which we're treating basically as an index, plus 1. So we should get the same result of 2, 3, 4. Okay, here's the array.from way to do this. So you can, let's uncomment this. Just like we said before, you can, this is not actually pushing into an array. This is, let's see here. Yeah, we actually want to log this one. So instead of logging the R, we are going to be logging this one since we're not actually pushing. We're just creating a new array from scratch. So we start with array.from. We set the length, and we know that we want it to be the same length as our filled array length. And then every single time we go through it, we're just going to take that element, and we're going to add 1 to it. The reason we're not using this one right here is because there's no element to look at yet, basically. So we just need to make sure that that is nothing for now. So we can go ahead and just run this, and you'll see that we get the same results. Okay, and then another way to do this is to just map over your original array. So we're just taking our original array, we're mapping, and every single one of those elements we're going to add 1 to. So this one might look a little bit like that second for loop, bit like, let's see, where did you go? I think that is this one, yeah. Let's just comment or copy this over just to compare it here for a moment. So yeah, you can see that this is pretty similar. So we're just taking the element, we're adding 1 to it. In fact, really all of these should be pretty similar looking to one another. But okay, and then another way is the reduce And this one is probably the silliest out of all of these for this goal, but so you probably wouldn't use a reduce just to add one to each thing in an array, but just to show that you can. So we would take our original array and we would reduce. We have our accumulator. We have our current element right here as B. And then in our accumulator, or A right here, we push the current element plus 1, and then we have to return our accumulator after that. And we start our accumulator as an empty array. And of course, that will give us the 2, 3, 4 as well. Okay, so this this is probably not exhaustive. I'm sure there's other ways to reach that same goal of initially we started with 1, 2, 3, and then we added ones, we got 2, 3, 4, and all of these. But we did cover quite a few. And the whole point of this is to show that if you're just starting out in your coding career and you want to get into software development, there's going to be many different ways to do things. And depending on the people you're working with, depending on if efficiency or legibility is more important, depending on a number of different factors, it's good to be able to understand how to do things in different ways. And like I said, some of these for this case don't make a whole lot of sense to actually do in the real world, but you will come across certain times when you do need to use something that you normally wouldn't. Okay, so I think that's enough for now. I hope this was helpful, and we'll see you for the next video here.